Oh, there's.
Hi. All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today. It's really wonderful to see all of your faces. This is Left Bank Books and Schlafly Public Library welcomes Hugo and Nebula Award-Winning St. Louis author and Leckie. I want to start off by thanking the incredible staff and event people here at Schlafly. They are wonderful to work with, and we are so lucky to be able to use this amazing space. So thank you very much. When you buy from Left Bank Books, your money goes directly back into the local economy, keeping your libraries free, your parks free, your streets paved. All of those fantastic things are because you buy from businesses in St. Louis. So thank you so much for buying tonight, for buying multiple copies for your friends, whatever the case might be, it is much appreciated. Let's go down here. Oh no, I need to tell everyone about our event at the end of the month. Oh yes. So if you are a fan of Ann Leckie, which I believe that you probably are, you might be very excited to know that at the very end of the month, well not very end, at the end of the month on June 22nd.
Is it 22nd? This is 20-something.
26. You would think I would have written this down, but I did not. Yes, on June 22nd.
22nd.
You're right.
There we go. I was right the first time. On June 22nd, Anne will be in conversation with the also multiple award-winning author, Martha Wells. I did bring a couple of copies of which came tonight.
It's really good.
It is
If
really
you haven't
good.
read it yet, it's really good.
It just came out, so no judgment if you haven't read it, but you should. If you don't know who Martha Wells is, she won every award possible for the Murderbot series, of which Anne and Mark, are you a fan of the Murderbot? Okay, good. We're all big fans of Martha Wells here, so you should come to that event as well. Tonight's book, let's talk about it for just a second. John Scalzi says, there are few who write science fiction like Ann Leckie can. There are few who ever could. And Publishers Weekly says, Leckie's humane, emotionally intelligent, and deeply perceptive writing makes this totally it cut off my
no.
Yep, so I'm gonna just guess at what the end of the line says. I apologize, but we're all friends here, so including all the people watching online. Makes this tautly plotted adventure feel fundamentally true while also offering longtime fans a much anticipated glimpse into the Radch most mysterious species. Readers will be thrilled. Ann Leckie is the author of the Hugo Nebula, Arthur C. Clarke, and British science fiction award-winning novel Ancillary Justice. She has worked as a waitress, a receptionist, a rodman on a land surveying crew, and a recording engineer, and she lives here in St. Louis, and we are very pleased to have her here. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, Mark W. Tiedemann worked in photography for 25 years, both as freelance and as a lab technician. In pursuit of a lifelong dream, he attended the Clarion SF writing workshop, after which he began regularly selling short fiction and then began selling novels, beginning with Mirage, part of the ongoing Asimov's Robot City series, and then his own original novels beginning with Compass Reach. With the digital revolution of photography, Mark left the industry and went to work for Left Bank Books in St. Louis. He retired in late 2021 to continue his intent to write and publish. We do have Mark's newest book, Granger's Crossing, available for sale tonight, as well as several of his fantastic other books. Without further ado, will you all please help me in welcoming, on behalf of Left Bank Books and Schlafly Public Library, our fantastic, amazing guests for the evening, Ann Leckie and Mark Tiedemann.
Actually applauding you and not clapping for myself.
You can clap for yourself. I think people should clap for
It's,
themselves.
yeah, it's,
I know what you mean.
but anyway, number 5 in the Radch series, and I am pronouncing that correctly, right? The Radch.
Well, I say Radch, but I also say that Radch space is very large. There are a lot of different languages, dialects, accents, so how you say it is probably right somewhere.
Okay. I'm from the county. You're building a very nice mosaic universe in this, and it's one of the better ones. What I like particularly is that in each one, you've picked a different subject to shine a light on in terms of theme. In this one, I just want to jump right into it. I really like what you've done with the idea of family in this. Would you expand on that a bit? I mean, what attracted you to this particular way of approaching the book?
So, well, I started out the book not with any particular theme in mind. It was just playtime. And I felt like I wanted to write something, and I felt I didn't want to write something that was gonna like rip my heart out. I wanted something that was gonna be comforting and kind of light. And so I just started putting things together that I liked. But family is something that I know we were saying earlier, there is science fiction that deals with family. There's a fair amount, I think, but the standard template of a science fiction story is often the adventurer who doesn't have a family or who's separated from their family to go out and have an adventure, being separated from their family. There's lots of dead parents, you know, and excuse me, and that's really cool. But I wanted something that felt a little warmer, you know. And actually, my family history kind of predisposes me to think about some of the things that come up in this book. For starters, my mother was adopted. And so she was born in the 40s, and at that time, a lot of times parents didn't even tell their kids they were adopted, you know, for much of their lives, and it would be a traumatic thing to discover. That's almost unthinkable now, I think. And you also had no contact whatsoever with your biological relatives. Not infrequently, people would ask her, and people would ask me when I was a little kid, and say, do you know who your real parents are? Do you know who your real grandparents are? And I said, those are my real grandparents. Those are my real grandparents. I don't know who my biological grandparents are, but those are not people who are relevant to me, right? I was also, in the early 70s, my parents were divorced. And at the time, that was very unusual and scandalous. And many of the kids I went to elementary school with just couldn't even get their heads around it. It was just, what? This is amazing, ridiculous. How could it even happen? And went through things like in the 80s or 90s where you'd go to say, oh, there's a family benefit, and they'd say, well, your name isn't the same as the last name of who you're claiming your parents are. So you can't be a member of the same family. And so it was hard for me not to look around at what we said was the ideal structure of a family and what families were actually like and doing in the real world. And so that was something I was thinking about very specifically. I wanted one of the main three characters is adopted, and I wanted to be very clear, those are his parents, right? They love him, and no matter what decisions he makes by the end, no matter what place he finds in the world, those are still going to be his parents and still going to be his family. And so I just started out saying, okay, that's how it's going to be, and that's going to make me happy to have a happy family. And his parents love him, even though his life is hard. And so I really did it to just please myself. But then the things you do in the early chapters are the things that lay the ground for what happened later on. So I think that's probably how that happened.
Yeah, and then science fiction happens, and you throw this biological wrinkle into it where, no, there really is a reason why he has to come back to his actual family, however you define that. And on that hinges, not necessarily a nail-biting plot, but, you know, it was kind of edgy. Now, how do you resolve this and still give people agency, which is the other shoe in this whole thing? Because the decisions that Reed wants to make,
He can't make.
And how do you determine agency in a system like that?
Well, I think agency in a writing context is a term that sometimes is, I guess, misunderstood. I'm not accusing you of misunderstanding it because I know you're, yeah. A lot of times people will think of agency as being a character is able to make big earth-shattering decisions. But most of us cannot make big earth-shattering decisions. And yet we do make choices in our life. And they are important choices. They affect the rest of our lives. They affect the people around us. And they're very tiny little choices. Sometimes we don't even see how our choices affect other people, but they surely do down the line. And so I feel like when you put a character in a bind like that, where they can't do what they want to do, and they can only make small choices, then the thing to do is say, okay, what are the small choices that they can make? Can any of those lead up to anything where maybe they don't get what they want, but they get something that's going to work, right? What choices can they make that will be good for them that might hurt other people? Are they willing to do that? Is a choice, a small choice where they can get kind of what they want and also help someone else? Is that going to be a choice that character is going to make? Those little choices actually are the things that make a character, right? That's how you know who someone is, by the choices that they make. And those choices aren't always big and earth-shattering, and they aren't always the choices the characters want to make.
They aren't always the choices that the character's going to see to fruition. You did variations on all three with the whole, this is who I want to be and what I want to do. The E9 character, I thought, she tickled me. Because here's somebody that just basically lost her home. And forgive me, I don't want to do spoilers. How many people here have actually read the book?
It just came out yesterday.
It just came out yesterday.
I just,
45 minutes.
you know,
I know that there are people who have been.
Truth in advertising requires me to ask that question. She basically loses her family, and they give her this job that basically do it, don't do it, we don't care, and then she decides that she's going to be responsible, which was delightful because she turns out to be really good at it.
Yes.
You're in for a
Yeah.
treat.
I enjoyed NA a lot, yeah.
Is it an I?
I say NA, but once again, space is big. I don't know how Adjo Ando says it, who is amazing. She does the audiobook. I absolutely, her voice is incredible. She's an amazing actress. I just wanted to put that plug out there for any of y'all that are into audiobooks.
And then the third character, is it Kven or Cuban?
I say Kven.
Kven. Okay, because he's Scandinavian. His choices almost come across comic.
Yeah.
But there's this underlayer of no, you really don't understand what you're trying to choose and why you can't do it. So he's standing there stamping his foot saying, you know, this is what I want, and everybody, like, what side of the bed did you get up on this morning?
Yeah, well, and Kven's context is really pretty horrifying, but you're right, I did actually try to make Kven funny. I guess I was trying to leaven the body horror with some silliness. Yeah, Kven's context is appalling. And when Kven discovers really what all that context entails, they do not want it, but they can't not have it, right? And so, yeah, in some ways, Kven was my favorite character to write because there's just something fun about writing like dismemberment and, you know, that sort of. Sorry, any of y'all who are writers probably understand what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I get it. A side issue, but it is really rich in the book, and one of the things in all science fiction is how you deal with your aliens. Is it possible to write a truly alien? And I like, you sort of did it by one step removed. And the Predator is still not actually described, but we're now not sure we want them described.
The Predator will never be on stage in my books. Because, did y'all watch the X-Files when it was on? Yeah? And there's all this mysterious stuff and all these things adding up, and then they explain it, and you're like, really? Well, that's disappointing. That's so mundane, right? The trying to describe it is never going to be as cool as the offstage, the shadow glimpsed, from a distance. So yeah, the Presbyter themselves are never going to be on stage, but it does let me make the Presbyter translators.
That's an interesting, I won't say dodge, but.
Well, but it is a dodge, it's a cop out. That's what it
Okay,
is.
all right. But
Asimov's, all his universes were always human.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't blame Asimov for doing, the observation for folks online was that Asimov was always avoiding doing aliens, always did humans and robots. I can't blame him for doing that, but there's just something cool about a really cool alien, right? CJ Cherry's aliens, yeah, David Brin's aliens, they're just really great aliens. But I have to admit, I don't actually believe that it's possible to write a really alien. My brain is a human brain. My readers have human brains and are going to have difficulty relating to beings that don't think anything like a human. So to a certain extent, all of my aliens are going to be humans dressed up in funny suits. There's no really avoiding that. So my approach to as much as I can is to make them as cool as I can, right? To make them funny or make them cool or make them beautiful or intriguing or something, because I know I can't actually make them alien. I'm just going to do my best. And leave it to the universe. So.
yeah, the image of the Get device stuck on the wall trying to do what it does. Yeah, you did ramp up the humor in this book quite a bit. The thing is that in context, you have to stop and realize it's funny, because there's all this other stuff is going on that's really not. But the other thing, getting back to the family thing, is that this is a consortium of alien cultures that have to get along, and it's like sitting down to dinner with a very dysfunctional family at Thanksgiving.
It kind of is, isn't it?
And and hoping that nobody talks about Aunt Anne from way back in the distant past and what happened,
And then there's drunk Aunt Tiedemann Bori turning up at the
Yes.
Friday,
Yes. But it's like that, isn't it, really? When you have old civilizations, and it must have been like that in Vienna after Napoleon.
Oh,
These
surely.
people getting together and sitting down at the table.
And they all knew each other.
And they all,
I mean,
they were all related. And along with that, you've sort of reduced the Radch in scope and power. Very gradually, it's like, okay, there's the I don't think there's any other way to pronounce that.
There's no other way to pronounce it, it's yeah.
And the Gek and the Presger, and now the Radch is becoming sort of just one of the bunch instead of what you had in the first three books, this massive, awesome power.
Yeah, well, I mean, it because of what happens at the end, people have read the trilogy, right? Okay, so I'm not gonna spoil it. Because of what happens at the end of the trilogy, it's pretty clear that the future of the Radch it's gonna splinter. It's gonna fall into pieces, so it's not going to be.
Yeah.
And that by the time this book has started, that process has only really begun in earnest. But it's coming, right? It's gonna split into a bunch of different groups.
Particularly with the AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, I gotta ask, is that character related to the ancillary from first books?
Oh, Steam?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's Steam, yeah.
Okay,
That's the same shit.
all right.
All y'all, there's a Steam will turn up.
Okay.
People were wondering if there was gonna be somebody from the Republic of Two Systems, and yes, there is somebody from the Republic of Two Systems.
Yeah, this is terrific stuff. So, what's next?
What's next? I am under contract for another book. Don't tell my editor. I really am not sure what it's gonna be, but she expects to see something in January.
No.
I only have like the vaguest idea. I'm not ready to start writing. I'm gonna have to write really fast by like August. We'll find out. It'll be great though. It's supposed to be another Radch Universe book also. So.
It's supposed to be.
It has to be. It's specified in the contract. I'm not aware of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but,
Because I cheated them with last time. They wanted 2 science fiction books on my last contract,
yeah.
and I gave them Providence, and then I started writing Raven Tower. And then they said, oh, we'll buy that fantasy novel. And by the time we were done negotiating, my agent was like, yeah, you'll just take it in the contract instead of the science fiction she promised you. Right? So they're like, no, you're not getting that this time.
I just had a thought, it just went
Oh, I hate that.
the other. Are you going to introduce any other alien cultures?
No, I don't think so, but never say never. The problem is, I'm not an outliner. So something could come up as a surprise, but this universe I've been constructing for actually a very long time, and the Gek, the Presker, have been the aliens in this universe for a very long time. It's entirely possible there would be another one. That would be a big deal, as you all know, right? Politically, it would be a huge mess. It would be a whole other conclave. It would be, probably start a few wars. Who knows what? Oh, that might be interesting. But but currently, I don't have any plans for that. So.
Okay. Fine.
Go ahead, be like that.
So, I want to get a little bit technical now, one writer to another.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Button at the end, at the bottom.
Yeah,
There we go. That's that right.
okay, I did do that. One of the things over the last 30 or 40 years that I have noticed writers growing into in a very special way is, you take science fiction from 40 years ago, and a lot of it had to do, it was very distinctly about the world building. People were constructing the lineaments of their contexts and the gadgets and all of that stuff. Recently, all of that is taken for granted, and now we're talking about the people who have to actually live in it, which we always did, but never quite to the state that we've got it now, where it's almost as if, well, of course you guys know this place, I don't have to describe it anymore, and now we could just deal with the people. But it's all still there. And this is kind of learning, from the past and standing on the shoulders of giants kind of stuff. But when you sit down to construct one of these things, does it ever concern you that you might have to describe a little bit more of the background than you do?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Did I turn my mic on?
I didn't do that.
I did. So it absolutely does. To make it even more difficult, I'm not a particularly visual writer. So I have to work very hard to get my visuals in. And often I'll get partway through and be like, I'm not working on the visuals. Everybody knows what this room looks like, and I'll just keep going. It really depends. If I don't feel like I need those little details, but very often the little details provide things that come in handy. Going back to the trilogy, the only reason that the T-sets became such an important factor was because in the first scene of Ancillary Sword, I needed a prop, I needed something for Copper 5 to care about, to have a conversation with Breck. And that interaction, I was like, all right, well, dishes, But then the dishes were there. And so there was something that I could just keep bringing back, and it just kept building in kind of importance as I went along. And so having things for characters to pick up and eat off of and throw at each other and, throw against the wall and break, it can be super important for characters. But it isn't always. There are a bunch of different ways of constructing characters and scenes, and they don't always require that sort of thing. But yeah, I find that stuff is pretty important. I tend to like to go to a museum. I love when I travel to go to a museum and look at stuff, look at clothes, look at furniture, look at dishes, look at pictures of things online, so that I've got them in my inventory, right? For when I'm like, oh, I need a room, I need some dishes, I need some chairs. Okay, blue damask, yeah, that'll be nice. And oh yeah, I'll make a tea table that's carved out of wood. Yeah, I saw a table kind of like that. And so I steal a lot of stuff, right, from the real world. I kind of feel like I really love those big world building, when that's really cool. Like, half the reason I feel like those of us who love science fiction and fantasy love it is for the cool worlds, it's fun to read. They say, don't info dump. And you're like, well, but maybe I want to read an info dump about this cool world that the author has constructed, right? I feel like the technique has kind of changed recently, where instead of outlining all of the sort of very physical, practical things, you're sort of implying a bigger world with the smaller things. I think a lot of writers are doing that work in the background, but not necessarily putting it on the page. And that's great. I really like that. I tend to do that, obviously. But I have to admit, I love me a Jack Vance with a bunch of footnotes. Right? Yeah. Those of you who haven't read Jack Vance, he has glorious footnotes. They're just wonderful. And yeah.
If you're not a visual writer, because I read your work and it paints a picture. I'm
I'm glad to
seeing
hear that.
I'm seeing this stuff, and when I sit down to write, I kind of have to see it so that I can step into it.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you stepping into it if you're not a visual writer?
Well, I do have to sit and visualize it.
Okay.
And that's some of the hardest work that I'm doing, actually. The next part of the hardest work, as you know, is like, okay, now I have to turn that into a sentence. That does what I want it to do.
Yeah.
Because you can write different sentences about the same thing that are all accurate, but they do very different things, right? And that's when you start banging your head against the keyboard. Yeah. So yeah, I sit and try and I browse museum sites, right? I look around, I read nonfiction, that's how I do that. And that's why I steal so many things from the real world, because it's easier to visualize something that I've actually seen.
Speaking of stealing things from the real world, this group of refugees that adamantly refuses to believe that the Presker exists.
Oh, I don't know where I got that.
I
You
was
know,
wondering
where
where
I
that
got
came from.
The past few years has been a real education in things that not just we as a society, but science fiction writers assumed about people's rationality, right? And I could talk for a long time about it. As science fiction folks, we often place a really high value on completely logical, rational thinking, when in fact, none of us thinks completely logically and rationally. None of us. Not a one of us. And if you removed the emotions from your decisions, you would have a real tough time deciding what to have for dinner, or almost anything else, right? So when I say I learned things about people's rationality, that's not quite what I mean. But you do kind of have a faith, like, if people lived on a space station, they would actually be super careful about hull breaches, right? Everybody would know that because you would die otherwise. Like, no, I'm sorry. In the future, people are walking out those darn airlocks. After the past couple of years, I believe it, And also when I looked at it, I was like, a lot of my plots depend on everybody's afraid of the Presker. Everybody knows how terrible it is. And I'm like, actually, probably everybody isn't afraid. There are probably Presker deniers out there, right? And so there are Presker deniers in the book, yeah.
I love that. I'm trying not to.
Standing there looking at a Presker translator.
Yeah.
It's a hoax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I am what you're saying doesn't exist. But they have an agenda that depends on that.
They have an agenda that depends on, and one I also worked kind of hard. I'm not sure I 100% succeeded. They have reasons for that agenda.
Oh, yeah.
And their reasons for that agenda are not unsympathetic. They are not like right-wing, anti-vaxxers. They're kind of like right-wing anti-vaxxers, but it's a different context that's producing this behavior. And there is some sympathy with their cause outside of the denial. Right?
I saw them more like Armenians.
I'll be honest, I was thinking of the Irish.
That works too.
Partly because that's my family background.
Okay.
And I figured if I was gonna do that, it was gonna be safer to draw on my own
Yeah.
family history then.
Well, that's the other thing that's hard to remember is that you come face to face with somebody who everything that Lee flies in the face of what you think is normal. It's hard to remember that there may be perfectly sound reasons for them having come to that conclusion. They may still be wrong, but that doesn't mean that the input that led there.
Yeah, you can take things that make sense and build up a conclusion that makes no sense whatsoever. It's entirely possible to do, yeah.
And I thought that was a nice stroke of genius there. So, since none of you have read the book and everything else that I have in mind will
Spoiler?
go into spoilers, let's just open up the floor to,
Oh, yeah.
questions.
I think you had your hand up first, you were like.
So I think science fiction is often a forerunner on pushing against the gender binary, and in your work in particular, you've done a spectacular job of sort of breaking that down. And I was wondering if the
Oh, good plan, yeah.
apologies. So I had started out by saying that I think that science fiction in particular pushes against the boundaries of the gender binary, and that you've done an excellent job of that in your work. And I was wondering if the recent increased antagonism towards any diversity and gender identification that's been going on in this country has impacted the way that you approach that in your work.
That's an interesting question. What's going on right now is appalling. I had hoped that there was some positive strides being made, but I'd forgotten the lesson of like the 70s when after the 70s, there's a huge backlash against women working in, and of course now we're having the backlash against queer folks, trans folks. It's ridiculous. It does not, however, affect the way that I'm writing, because I'm going to do what I do anyway. There are people who don't like me for doing what I do. And I mean, oh well. Right, yeah. You had your hand up.
Sort of similar question, so apologies. But I was wondering, what was your inspiration for making gender diversity such an important part of all of your books? Because clearly it's just like you go to it at such a deep, linguistic level with so many different, genders based on what society you're talking about. What was your inspiration for that? Why do you do that in your books?
So that actually is kind of an accident. I started out with Ancillary Justice thinking, won't it be fun and relaxing to write about a society that really doesn't care about gender? Easy peasy, right? And I had a rough time and ultimately settled on using she as a default, as is famously the case. And that wasn't a perfect solution to my problem, but I stand by it. I liked it a lot. I think it served my purpose. There was a fair amount of critique of that, and I'm not just talking about from people who were bigots. And I listened to a lot of that critique and thought about that, and that, because that was something I was trying so hard to do in the first book, it became a topic that I was really interested in, listening to the things that people had to say about their experience of gender, people's theories about what gender was and how it worked. And of course, this intersects really hard with language. And language is something that I've always been really interested in. And so, I started doing it. It's a lot of fun. I kept on doing it. And I'm not going to write the same book over and over again, because that would be boring to me. As a reader, there are writers who I will read them write the same book over and over again because I love it so much, right? But as a writer, I couldn't possibly do that. And so that's why that comes out the way that it does, that I'm always just sort of taking another step in what I'm thinking about the conversations that I'm listening to.
I'd like to expand on the gender thing. I'm loving it, because when I picked up Ancillary Justice, it took about 2 or 3 chapters for me to make the adjustment. But I never recoiled. It was just, okay, nobody knows who's who, and that got me thinking about one of the unspoken problems with a lot of fiction, and in science fiction for a long, long time, because we've always had a thread in science fiction of humans finding the sexy alien. And, you know,
Why wouldn't you?
why wouldn't you? But they always seem to fall into our gender norms. And really, as we were discussing earlier, if they were really alien, why would that apply? So I took this as a salvo in war to tear that down. If you're into exogamy, be into exogamy, but don't try to turn the alien into just another date. And I thought, you know, this is a good way to start that. Because when you apply those same standards to humans, that's when everybody's hair lights on fire. We're not aliens, and yet you're treating us that way to a certain extent. And I liked the turnabout.
I loved your discussion of why you included dishes, and, needing something for them to throw, but also to point out what people covet and what they treasure and what they don't care about, right? But I wonder about Breck and his music and where that came from. 'Cause
So,
it's-
yeah, that actually came from, Breck is an old character, one who I've been thinking of for a long time before I started writing. And so I would say to myself, okay, if I had plenty bodies, what would I do? And one of my first reactions was, I could sing choral music all by myself. And I was like, no, that's stupid. I can't do that, that's just dumb. And, but it stuck, right? And so that's literally why Breck sings and collects music, because she can, right? And because if I were in that position, I would totally do that, because choral music is the bomb, right? Yeah. Anybody who has not sung choral music really ought to give it a shot. Yeah.
I'm gonna ask the next question.
Okay,
I bet you know what it is.
do I?
It's what I always ask you. So then I reveal, like, I'm not really a science fiction reader. I know that that's like, and then I say, and like convince me that I should be a science fiction reader. And you give me several incredible recommendations.
Have you read Piranesi yet?
You did tell me about that
Read
last time.
Piranesi, it's so good. I know you won't read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell because you're afraid of how thick it is. It's so good.
Yeah.
But read Piranesi.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I am reading Witch King.
Witch King is really, really good. You have read Murderbot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, everybody here loves Murderbot. Yeah, because Murderbot is awesome. Oh, so people have asked me this, and so I might as well just say it. Pirate Exiles of the Death Moons, the serial that Reet watches, is absolutely a hat tip to Murderbot. If I could have had Reet watch Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon, I would have done it. I didn't try. I didn't think I could get away with it. I was sure my editor would kick up a fuss, so I didn't try it.
Who's next?
I'm curious a little about your process and how you kind of keep all of the characters straight in your brain. They have such distinct personalities. It's
Oh,
so
thank
much
you.
character. How do you when you sit down, you're like, okay, I'm writing Breck right now. How do you get into the headspace of those different characters and keep them all so different?
It's a difficult thing to describe, actually. One of the things that I do is try and imagine what their voice sounds like, how they speak, and what their voice is like, so that I try and almost ventriloquize, right? But I can't explain how I get into that headspace. It's really kind of a play pretend kind of a thing. Actually, one of the cool things about writing is that you get to do all these goofy things like play pretend, like professionally. You get to play with your action figures in the dirt, and other people are like, "Yay, go G.I. Joe!" So it's kind of like that, actually. But that's where I have a harder time envisioning visual stuff, but it's easier for me to get a feel for what a person is like. And I can't really explain what that is, but the best I can tell you is try and hear the voice.
So just expand on the process, because you also said you're not a visual person. You also said you're not an outliner. So I'm wondering where the plots come from, because I've tried.
It's a mystery.
Yeah, I've tried writing things, and I have the whole thing, it's in my head, I know exactly where it is, and I start writing, and all of a sudden it goes zoop this way.
Yeah, they do that. So, that's one of the reasons I don't outline. So I'll tell you an anecdote. Ages and ages ago, I was having a conversation, it wasn't a one-on-one conversation, it was at a convention with CJ Cherry. And she talked about how one day she opened a drawer and she found a piece of paper and it was an outline. And she was like, this is a really interesting thought. I don't know why I never wrote this book. And she looked closer at it and it was Down Below Station. The book had changed so much from where she had begun. So, usually what happens is I'll have some characters in a setting. Characters don't come without setting because we are who we are because of the world that we live in. And I'll have characters in a setting. I'll have a feeling for where I want to end up. And usually I'll have a couple of high points on the way. So with Ancillary Justice, I knew that they were going to fall off that bridge. I had no idea how that was going to happen. I just knew they were going to fall off the bridge. I knew other sort of big moments were going to happen. And then I just sort of start writing and navigate from the spot I know about to the next spot I know about. But I do it kind of by feel, like what feels right and will take me in this direction. And it's a very slow process. I kind of envy the folks I know who do very careful outlines, and they're like, in this chapter, there'll be these scenes, and in this chapter, there'll be these scenes. And I'm like, how do you know if you haven't written? Well, they know, right? They can do that. It's magic. I don't know how to do it. But my advice would be, don't be afraid to veer off as long as you're going to end up where you want to end up. Which sometimes it's hard to tell, and that's kind of trial and error. But don't be afraid to veer away from your outline, because what's an outline? You know, it's not the book. It's just a plan, and maybe you change your plan. Yeah. Right.
It's like jazz.
It's like jazz.
I'm gonna ask another question. Which came first, the beautiful cover for Translation State or the redesign for the other?
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I should know because I'm casting my mind back to those email exchanges where they sent me the proofs. I'm pretty sure it was the redesign for the re-releases of the trilogy. And then they were like, and then we'll have Translation State and it'll be in the same vein. Although I really wanted them to put a radish on the cover. They wouldn't put a radish on the cover for me. They were like, that's kind of silly, and it won't tell the readers. And I'm like, but if there should be a radish on the cover.
I think you should be able to get your say on that.
Well, they did finally, my editor was like, okay, Ann, we will put a radish on the title page. Will that make you happy? I'm like, yes, that will make me happy. So there's a radish on the title page.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about languages in your Radch universe, because as a Star Trek fan, I was always frustrated with like, what do you mean all Klingons speak the same language?
Oh, yes, don't get me started. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that, because I really appreciate how you show the complexity of languages, how people have like accents, and that represents class, or where you're from, and things like that. So even like the same language, you show that complexity too. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a thing like you that has often, I mean, I know why they do it. I know why Star Trek does it. I know why everybody in Star Wars speaks basic or whatever it is. I think it's basic, right, in Star Wars. I totally understand why. I understand why they have a universal translator in Star Trek. Because it's the same reason every alien is a human being with some putty on their nose or their pointy ears or whatever. Makes perfect sense, but it is very frustrating, isn't it? Because real life languages aren't like that at all. And I feel like, I don't want to overstate this because I don't want to sound like the, having stories where everything isn't completely accurate is the end of the world. It's not. But we look at the world through the filter of the stories that we see. And I wanted to put a filter out there that's like, no, actually this is very complex and maybe it would be cool to think about it, right? And language is really cool. It's really cool, the fact that, we'll say, oh, everybody in England speaks English. Well, that's not actually true, right? Well, in the US, we speak English. Well, we also speak a shirt ton of other languages, right? Thank you, Good Place, for those. And accents and the way that we can tell so much or think we can tell so much about a person from accents. Because, for instance, somebody with a Southern accent, you make a lot of assumptions about somebody with a Southern accent that are not necessarily true, right? And those are all super interesting. So I am glad that you enjoy that. Yeah, and don't get me started about Darmok and Jalan. I'll start ranting. I'll start foaming at the mouth. I'll fall down. It won't be good. Yeah.
Another related question to that question though now. I was wondering, so I found it really fascinating how you, in the original trilogy, you used Radch as kind of like a political limitator to people. At least that's how I saw it. How they couldn't talk about people being civilized without them being Radch, right? And that was like an inherent limitation of the language that you explained in the books. I'm wondering, what was your inspiration for that, and how was that important to you? It kind of reminds me of like Newspeak in 1984, maybe, how that was kind of a way to limit people. Was that your thinking, or am I just completely on the page?
So I didn't, Newspeak is a really interesting example. I didn't envision those limitations as ones that were deliberately placed. I feel like all of us have things because we're all speaking American English. There are things that are easier and more difficult to speak about. If you think about the way we talk about someone who is kind and generous and considerate, we call the what? Humane. Well, that's inhuman. It becomes difficult to talk about someone who is humane, who isn't human, right? How do you say that? There are ways to say it. I'm not an advocate of safer wharf, the safer wharf theory, which is that the language that you speak absolutely dictates how you think about the world. I don't think it's that strong, right? But I do think that some tools are just more difficult to do some jobs with. And if you speak a language that calls civilized Americans, what's that going to do? Every time you want to say somebody's civilized, you say they're American. It makes it very difficult to talk about someone who is civilized who isn't American, right? And so that's the kind of thing that I was trying to, just part of my interest in language. But I didn't see it as something that was done deliberately. Like Newspeak is definitely like a whole propaganda thing, yeah.
Well, then there's examples, historically there are examples of court speak. In China, there was the official court language, which left a lot of people out, and eventually it grew into, if you're a civilized citizen of this country, you speak this, and everybody else is a barbarian. Of course, barbarian, as we all know, comes from the word for somebody who stutters. Basically, is what a barbarian was, because nobody could understand what they say. They must not be civilized. We've got a long history of limiting people's access based on their language.
Question? And dialect as well. The number of people who were told in school, that's not proper English. Or someone who uses a dialect and they're told, well, you're just lazy. Put in a little effort and speak proper English. Like, well, who died and made this dialect the one that's the right one, right? Yeah.
A real quick anecdote. The SF writer Gregory Benford is also a plasma physicist. He teaches, or did teach, at UCLA. And I found out he was from Alabama. Well, you're talking to Greg, he has a perfectly flat accent. And I said, you don't sound as though I had to get rid of that, because nobody at a science conference will take you seriously. So, well, the proton mass has to be delivered in a particular way for the neutron to reach. No one will listen to you. So he just eradicated his accent.
Yeah, the numbers of languages and dialects that have been lost to that process is probably pretty staggering, yeah.
I was curious about your desert island book list, but with a sense of how that would outline your vision of science fiction.
Oh, that's a complicated question. I would hope that if I were marooned on a desert island, I would have a Wi-Fi connection in my hobo with me. It would be really difficult to choose like just 12 books. My experience of science fiction, my history with science fiction, reading-wise, begins with an odd little scholastic book that I bought for a quarter in grade school about a boy who was trying to telekinetically switch samples on a rocket, and there was an alien in telepathic contact with him. I forget the name of the novel, but I loved it. I think I was in 3rd grade. Goes up through my discovery of Andre Norton, and also Jack Vance, who I discovered when I was quite young and found very congenial. There are a number of other writers who I loved. I would just read all kinds of things. I went to the Carpenter Branch Library every Saturday when I was a kid. But if I had to say for me what was the core of science fiction, it would be stuff like Andre Norton, C.J. Cherryh, which was very weird. I was almost out of high school when I discovered that I went to Rosati Kane, all-girls school, right? Out of high school, discovered that supposedly science fiction is something only boys read. And I was like, really? Of course, I mean, I wasn't hanging around too many boys. All my friends read science fiction. That was very odd to me. And there were lots of women, I read lots of women writing science fiction. Although I have to admit, it was a while before I realized Andre Norton was a woman. So those are very much Norton, Vance, Cherryh, very much my core folks. For a long time after college, shortly after college, I wasn't reading as much science fiction as I was reading like George Eliot and Jane Austen, and came back to it, obviously, and back to more Cherryh. And right now it's just amazing, right? The stuff that's out now is incredible. I mean, it's probably every year people were saying, wow, we are living in the golden age of science fiction. But wow, we are living in the golden age of science fiction, right? There's some amazing stuff coming out. It's really hard for me to encapsulate. Science fiction is huge, right? That's one of the glorious things about it. It can be anything. You can have a science fiction mystery. You can have science fiction romance. There's tons of that. You can have science fiction that's more sort of fantasy. You can have fantasy that's more sort of science fiction. You can have a science fiction that's very technical. You can have science fiction that's just very anthropological. Science fiction that's all about language. It's really awesome. Yeah. So I'm sorry I don't have a great answer for your question.
Oh, sorry. I do have just a couple of questions real quick, and I hope this is not too much too soon, but where do you get the material for your, where do you get the material for your book and for some of your books, and what are some of your favorite books that you've written?
That I've written?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's kind of.
Oh, that's okay. The material I really get from all around in the real world. When I get stuck, and I frequently get stuck,
Right.
I will go to the library, and I'm here in St. Louis. I'm super lucky. There are a number of great university libraries. We have the St. Louis Public Library, there's the county library, there's just all kinds of UNSL. I think anybody in the city can go up and get a card at UNSL at the library there. There's a fee, but still, it's awesome. And I'll walk up and down the history and anthropology shelves, right? Those are pretty much my favorites. I will go to museums and look at things. I will note down if I hear an interesting anecdote about something historical or something that happened to someone, or and so that's pretty much where I get the material, is from the real world. It's hard to pick a favorite because they're all my babies, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you write something, I'm guessing from your questions that you write.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do write different things too, so.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're all, even when something isn't about you personally, they still feel very personal. They came from out of your mind, you know.
Right.
So it's hard. So, but currently, I would say probably still Ancillary Justice to some extent, and almost always the most recent book, right? And
Yes,
so,
the last thing you've done.
yeah, the last thing I've done, which is what we're here for this evening.
Oh.
So,
Do so much sometimes, so.
I'm sorry.
I think you write so much sometimes, it's hard to keep track sometimes.
It is hard to keep track
Yeah,
sometimes.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
All right, who's ready to get book signed? Let's give another giant round of applause.